Good evening, everybody, and welcome new subscribers. This video is going to be a little different. It's certainly a departure from my normal content, but it's a video that is long overdue for somebody to have the balls to do it, and well, frankly, I do. Yep, there they are. I don't use them much, but they're still there. So, in this video, I want to talk about how the state of Pennsylvania, or should I say the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, is behind the times and needs to change in terms of emergency services. And this is not only for the betterment of, the citizens of Pennsylvania, but also for the benefit of those that work in emergency services, and why Pennsylvania isn't retaining much of the talent for people who seek those careers, and also a waste of taxpayer money, and just simply being out of touch, out of date, and if I'm being honest, most likely corrupt. So somebody has to say these words. I've talked to it before to State Senator Katie Muth. That was 6 years ago. But it's something that Pennsylvania residents should be aware of, and we should not only demand change, but also demand why the hell it's taken so long. Now, there's other things that need to change in the system, but I'm going to talk about emergency services because I have a bit of a fire EMS background. I'm also going to talk about police, and I will say this, there is one part of the state that has got with the times. Allegheny County, you're dismissed. You have county police. You have gotten with the times. This is, while it's going to be for the whole state, on the police side for fire, I'm particularly talking about the northwest suburbs of Philadelphia. Also, cities like Philly, Pittsburgh, even Harrisburg, Easton, Allentown, you're dismissed. I'm not talking about you. You're doing what you should be doing as in terms of fire and police. This is for places like Chester County, i.e. the haven of the good old boys club. And I think people deserve answers to this question of why things are the way they are and why they haven't changed, and what justification is there for our current antiquated system. So I think I gave a long-winded introduction, so I'm going to get into it. So basically, Pennsylvania is one of very, very few states in 2023 where emergency services, i.e. fire, police, and EMS, are provided either privately or at the township level instead of at the county level, as they are in places like Maryland and Virginia, where I used to work for the Arlington County Fire Department, where, the whole county has the same resources, and there's task force and there's specialty teams, and it just makes bloody sense. So we're going to discuss as to why things are the way they are and why they shouldn't be, and why we should demand change, and why tradition for tradition's sake is not a justification. So I'm going to try to keep this simple and not too long-winded, but chances are, for those of you that watch my other videos, slim chance of that happening. But this is not meant to be a rant. This is meant to be an informative video of a Pennsylvania taxpayer saying why. Why do we praise and hold on to such an antiquated system? What benefits, if any, are there to this system in 2023? Because it's any benefits that exist today are what's relevant. The benefits that may or may not have existed 50 years ago are not relevant. So basically, where I live in Chester County, we'll start with police. The police force is at the township level, and it makes no sense for many reasons, because for one, there's townships that don't have police, and therefore you are completely dependent on the state police. Side note that I'm not going to get too much into, though, another weird thing about Pennsylvania is the sheriff's department doesn't have the rights, like they can't act as police officers. Why? Every other state they can. That's another Pennsylvania thing that makes no sense. So now you have a level of county law enforcement that could be doing more, and the sheriff's deputies that I know want to be doing more, but because something tradition, we don't do it, and you're not supposed to question it because the almighty status quo is supposedly infallible. Well, it's not. But that's a side note. If you watch my other videos, I always have a side note. But back to my main point. So police at the township level do not make sense for very many reasons. As I stated, not all townships have them. Therefore, you're reliant on the state police. a county-based system would make so much more sense for so many reasons, and I'm going to list them. So one, Pennsylvania, the township level departments make no sense for a lot of reasons. One, it's tough to recruit the top talent because, and we're just going to be brutally honest in this video, they're good old boys clubs. You know, there's people getting in, getting special treatment, not because they're the best qualified, but because they know someone or they're related to somebody, which is corrupt and wrong. Let's be honest. I don't care who's friends with who, or, you know, if you believe somebody deserves to be a cop just because their dad or their uncle was one, it's like, who cares if his, you know, if he barely passed the test and he's out of shape. His dad a cop, that makes him a cop. What the fuck is this, The Simpsons? But you know, it should be the best qualified person regardless of who you're related for. It's a public service. It's a public sector job. It's not like passing down a family business. Even if one's father was, say, the chief of police, he still does not own that business. It's not his. It belongs to the taxpayers. Anyway, so for one, the township-based system has a hard time recruiting the best. Why? Well, because you pretty much have to know somebody even to be taken seriously to get in. And furthermore, and this is something that would never happen in Virginia or Maryland or Newcastle County, Delaware, you have to put yourself through a police academy, which means you have to pay to put yourself through an academy, whereas, say, in Virginia, you go through the civil service testing process, as I did in the fire department, and then your training is paid for. I know a lot of people in Pennsylvania never lived anywhere else in their lives, and they assume, well, the way we do it must be the best, and it must be how everybody does it. No, it's not. You're the freaks. You're the freak, Pennsylvania. You're the freak. Because the way it works in Arlington, in Annapolis, in Newcastle County, in Westchester County, New York, that is the norm. And there's a reason why that is. And we're going to get into it eventually. So stay tuned and listen, because I'm spewing facts. Facts that I'm told I'm not allowed to say simply because it questions the status quo, which people say is infallible for tradition's sake, which it's not. Because if we're all about tradition for tradition's sake, well, then why aren't cops still carrying a .38 special revolver? That was tradition for many decades. Why aren't firefighters still wearing hip boots and long coats? Those are tradition. Why? Because it doesn't make sense in today's age, although revolvers are cooler. But so now you have to put yourself through an academy. You want to be a cop locally, you got to put yourself through and hope you know somebody to get in, because there's a lot of good old boy shit. A lot of nepotism, a lot of cronyism, let's be honest. Not saying that there aren't good cops, there are, but I'm saying the hiring process is not standardized and there's some shady shit going on behind the scenes. Counter that to a county department where you have a standardized test for the whole county. You know, you go through the testing process, people get selected for the academy, and they're paid within that academy. And it is members of the police department of that academy who will then become these recruits, mentors, commanding officers, etc., who will be training them specifically for that county, which would be standardized throughout the whole county. Makes sense, right? Another big point would be career advancement for police officers. If you are in, and I know a lot of cops around here, and for example, if you are in a township police department, your career will be stunted. Why? Because it's a small department. So to advance, you're either transferring or you're waiting for somebody to retire. I know a now retired, very ambitious cop who spent 20 plus years as a sergeant. Why? You may ask, because in 20 years, one lieutenant's position opened up. Because let's be honest, a township department is basically a precinct. A chief of a township department is more or less a station commander. One station. Anyway, we'll get to that. So career advancement is limited for those that are in a township department because of its size. That may attract people from this area who they want to retain to go elsewhere, where they not only don't have to pay for their own academy, but they have a larger department to advance their career. Make sense? Makes sense. Okay, so there's that point. Another one I talked about the hiring process a little bit too. And it's not just for the cops. Also, we'll mention this too. County department means the whole county is covered by the same department, which also means more cops on the street, which means more jobs, specifically more jobs for veterans, because veterans rightfully get veterans preference points, which I do believe in. I don't believe in preference because somebody's uncle was a cop 40 years ago, but unless it was a line of duty death, but that's different. I'm talking about my uncle was a cop and he retired and, I inherit his badge. No, no. No, it's like you're 30 pounds overweight and you had a DUI. Well, but my uncle, it's like, good old boy shit. So in a county department, there's also a pooling of resources. Instead of having a small township department with jurisdictions that are essentially just precincts, you now have a countywide system. This also allows for task force, like we desperately need an opiate task force, other specialty units, because this is now one big department. Also, as I mentioned, career advancement. So, for example, say you have a cop in, let's just say, East Fallowfield, who aced the detective's exam, always wanted to be a detective, became a cop to become a detective. In a county-based system, that same cop, if there was not an opening at that precinct, could be given the option to say, well, we don't have a detective spot open in East Fallowfield, but you aced it. You're first on the list to become a detective. We have openings in Downingtown, Phoenixville, and Westchester. Where would you like to go? And that person could then choose, to go to one of those precincts within the same department that has an open slot for detectives. Or in the system that it is now, he may have to wait 5 years to move up to a job that he is more than qualified for simply because there's no opening. Makes no sense, right? Also, the red tape of dealing with all these little jurisdictions, all this interdepartmental stuff, which is basically and should be just drama between precincts. It's a waste of resources. It's a waste of taxpayer money. That money could be spent way more efficiently in a county-based system. And, given how much money is in this county, again, we're talking about more than Chester County, but that's where I grew up. So I'm going to use that as an example because I can speak about it most, more than others, but the same exists in Berks County, in Montgomery County, in Delaware County. We're talking mainly about the Philly suburbs, and we haven't even gotten the fire yet. So in that system, you can have, because we do have a state-of-the-art training facility for police and fire here that's being underutilized, but we could easily provide a state-of-the-art academy for recruits and not only retain talent, but also recruit, ambitious people from this area, because many other people who seek careers in law enforcement in this area not only go elsewhere because they don't want to pay for their own training, but they know, oh, I'm not in the club. I don't know anybody. I'll never even get a fair shot here. Why would I waste the money to put myself through an academy? Fair enough? Fair enough. So, the one worry I get is, well, what about all the chiefs? Well, law enforcement's supposed to be about protecting and serving, not, your own ambition to become a chief of a precinct, which is called a department, but in practicality, it's a precinct. That would be like if I was in Arlington, Virginia, there was 10 fire stations. If we made each one of them their own fire department, where it's like, well, but I'm the chief of I'm the chief of Falls Church, which is in Arlington County. Would that make sense to anybody? If a city that has, well, a county, but it's sort of like a city because it's Arlington and there's really no rural parts. But let's just say, if a county went from having one career fire department to 10, each station being their own department, would that make sense to anybody? No. So the one thing the only argument I've ever heard against having a county police department is, well, what about the chiefs? Simple enough. You're not, those guys aren't going to lose their job. You allow those who want the top brass positions to apply for them, see who gets hired. But what about the ones that don't? It's a real simple transition. Say, for example, the chief of Coatesville Fire Department did not get, I'm not sure, district chief. I'm going to say battalion chief, but that's a fire term. Battalion chief or deputy chief, assistant chief, doesn't get any of those positions. What happens to him? It's simple. The guy's been working in Coatesville all those years. It's like, well, guess what? You're no longer a chief. What you are is a captain. You are now the commander of this precinct, and a lot of what you've been doing won't change. But now you're not limited to just, the city of Coatesville, because guess what? A lot of crimes, they cross township lines all the time. So, makes sense, right? And I've talked to plenty of current and retired cops about this. Some people may not like the tone I'm taking, but this is something I've wondered about for 20 years and even did a petition 4 years ago, and no one's given me any answers. And I think that emergency services, number one thing, should be to best serve the area they're serving, not maintaining the tradition of years gone by. So, again, that person now, station commander. Get it? I'm being honest here. If people don't like what I'm saying, I've yet to hear no one has ever given me any benefits to the system as it is today now. They just get all angry and talk about tradition for tradition's sake, and this is how we've always done it. Well, that's not an argument for it. Their argument is basically, well, it's the status quo, and the status quo is by definition perfect, so you can't question the status quo. There is a reason why places like Arlington County, Virginia, went to county-based systems in the 50s. I understand the township-based systems pre-industrial revolution, but let's be honest, post-World War II, it hasn't made sense. Now I'm going to switch the fire. There's more I could say on police, but I was never in law enforcement, so I can't say as much. But fire, something I do know about. Let's be honest. We have a lot of dedicated volunteers, not as many as we used to. Why? Well, it's pretty simple. People have to work 2 and 3 jobs now. The good paying union manufacturing jobs that were abundant when I was a young kid in the early 90s, fascinated by all the volunteer firefighters, some of them my Gen X older cousins, those jobs don't exist anymore. So 30 years ago in Coatesville, for example, plenty of volunteers. Most of the firefighters worked at Lucan's steel mill. They worked shift work. So you had various guys available at various times of the day, depending on what shift you're on. Those jobs are gone. They don't exist anymore. So you don't have that benefit. And what you need is not, I'm not saying that Chester County should be a career fire department. It should be a combination department. For those of you that aren't aware of what that is, a combination department is a department that has full-time career firefighters and it has volunteers to supplement it. And this would vary by station. Some of the more urban areas like Westchester, you'd probably have, that station staffed by enough career firefighters to get 2 units out, whereas somebody more rural, like say Honeybrook, you would have the bare minimum just to get an engine out the door, less demand and call volume and all that. But, we're going to keep this simple. Again, very good training facility being underutilized. People just don't have the time to volunteer anymore. And the population density warrants it. There's over 600,000 people in Chester County, for example. That's comparable to Montgomery County, Maryland, which is, well, they're technically a combination, but they're pretty close to being full career jobs. It would create more jobs, specifically jobs for veterans. And also, people like me that grew up in this area that want to become career firefighters, you have no choice but to leave. The job doesn't exist here. And I know there's part-time positions here and there, but I'm saying there is no civil service process to apply and go through a civil service process and go through a recruit school like there is in Philly, like there is in Reading, like there is in DC, in Baltimore County, in Montgomery County, in Arlington County, in Fairfax County, in Anne Arundel County. I could go on and on. And it makes absolutely no sense why. Why? We certainly have the money for it. There is no reason for the system to be in place as it is now. And response times are getting slower because departments are moving, you don't have volunteers. And I'm going to throw EMS in that too. Pennsylvania, you screw over EMS workers so fucking hard. It's just corruption. It can't be anything else. You have these little third services departments who basically run it instead of running it on the county level. Experienced DMTs in this area make half of what I made as a recruit in the fire academy in Arlington, Virginia. And most of them are part-time. You wonder why you can't retain anybody. You don't pay them anything. It's just wrong. And this is a very busy EMS EMS area, but no, don't let them in the IFF, that's the firefighters unit, and have an actual career. Exploit them for all they're worth and let these third services kind of do their own thing instead of running it on the county level, but some good old boy's stuff in his pockets. And hey, this neo-feudalistic system that this area is so in love with, where it's like, well, so-and-so's grandfather did something good 50 years ago. Guess what? I don't care. Yeah, I know I'm getting angry. But again, these are words that have to be spoken. The amount of taxpayer money that's wasted on this out of date, antiquated system, where we could be spending the same amount of money and have, for example, especially the cops, more cops on the street, a more efficient system, and a state of the art fire system, but we don't. And the reason is because tradition, because good old boys club good. Why? I think the people of the state who pay taxes have every right to ask questions and be like, why are we so out of touch and out of date? Why can't we do what these neighboring states did decades ago and have, better response times, more personnel on the street, which again provides more jobs and more people paying taxes and can retain talent? Why would someone, with a dedicated paramedic, why would they stick around here when they can simply go less than 2 hours away and double their money from day one and be working towards a pension? Why? Makes no sense, right? So I think it's time, and there's a lot of other things, so I'll briefly touch on roads, to have a countywide road system, because this township does it this way, this township does it that way. What the fuck is this township bullshit in 2023? Can we stop pretending it's still 1912? Because I looked it up. The system we have in place, when it went into effect 1902, before like the big industrial thing, and it was mostly farmland. And here's another question that pisses people off when I say it. I always hear, well, that's just how we do it, and that's just the way it is. Well, who got to decide that? When and why? Why must we continue something that was done over 120 years ago? Why did those people have the right to set a system in stone that can never be questioned? Who were they? I don't know any of them. So it's just another question I want to add. I know this comes off as a bit of a rant because this is something that has frustrated me since I was a teenager, and I tried to do what I could about it. And a lot of people in these professions agree with me, but for some reason, so many people are afraid to question the status quo of this area. And it really is neo-feudalistic, to where there's people in certain townships who think they're, I'm the Duke of East Goshen. It's like, get the fuck over yourself. And it's all based on something like, well, my father was Big Shot McGee, good old boy in 1983. It's like, whoever you're talking about's been dead for 20 years. Like, your whole life is based on one, somebody in your family did something important once upon a time very long ago. Yes. So now my son with 3 DUIs gets a free pass and a cushy job because he's the second Earl of Warwick. It's like, get the fuck out of here. Yeah, I think people should demand answers as to why we still have the system we have. And to be fair, I did speak to a few good people in power in some of these townships, and their exact words were, we need to become Montgomery County, Maryland. So if you want to be in a position of power, your main duty is to, serve and protect and do what's right for the residents, for your taxpayers, for your voters, not, maintaining an out-of-date status quo simply because you personally benefit from it. That's corruption. That means you should be out of there, But there's a lot of people who feel that because of their last name and tradition, they're entitled to that power. There's a lot of public road works. Someone told me, I'll be professional and keep the township name quiet, but they actually said that 9 of the 11 people on their public works department were all related, and that they would decide who they were hiring before they would even post the job, because they didn't want to hire anybody who was black. Now, I can't speak to the veracity of the story, but the person who told me I know quite well. He had no reason to lie to me, and he was recently retired from this place. So somebody in the know, that's just beyond wrong in this day and age. And I'm sorry, I am on a mission to expose good old boys clubs because I've suffered at their hands, and they're wrong, and they're corrupt, and they're nepotistic, and they need to be thrown to the dustbin of history. And many areas have long ago, or at least are phasing them out. This area still celebrates them. Why? No one can tell me that either. So if you're that big into tradition, then, like I said it before, then why aren't the cops still carrying 38 specials? Who gets to decide what tradition is good for tradition's sake and when something is outdated and no longer efficient and should be thrown to the dustbin of history? But there's a reason why most places don't do emergency services at the township level. They do it at the county level. And hey, if I'm missing something and there is legitimate positives to the system Pennsylvania has in this day and age in 2023, please tell me, because that's what's relevant, what's best in this day and age, not decades and decades ago. I know this video is going to piss a lot of people off, but it should also get you to think. This is about your taxpayer money, what your tax money is paying for, and how that tax money could be creating more jobs for residents, be being used more efficient, and you having better and more efficient emergency services with better qualified personnel. So I hope it was enlightening, and if you want to argue with me, yeah, go ahead, leave it in the comments below. Just all I ask is that you use facts. Don't I can handle people disagreeing with me, but the argument that the status quo is by definition perfect because it's the status quo, that's not an argument. You're just falling in line. That, or you're benefiting from the status quo that may or may not be shady. I'm not sure, but you're not sure either. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's something people of this state should demand answers for, because sometimes it's time for things to change, and you have to demand change.